In the news tonight, Jordanians remember His Majesty the late King Hussein. Riots break out in various cities over the government's decision to raise fuel prices. And at least 6 Palestinians, including Hamas commander, are killed in stepped-up Israeli raids on the Gaza Strip. Good evening, you're watching the news at 10. His Majesty the King and the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Sabah, discussed on the telephone Jordanian-Kuwaiti ties and developments in the region. Jordanians remember His Majesty the late King Hussein, builder of modern Jordan, who reigned for about half a century. They recall King Hussein, the far-sighted leader, who with his wisdom and vision has won the hearts of his people, who rallied behind him, taking the country to the shores of safety. Asiya Hattab has more on King Hussein's life.
Jordan marks the 77th anniversary of the birth of His Majesty the late King Hussein. Throughout his 47-year reign, King Hussein worked hard to enhance his country and raise citizens' living standards. Building an economic and industrial infrastructure that advanced the quality of life of the Jordanian people was also a focus of the late monarch. During his era, primary education became mandatory, and schools were established across the kingdom's cities and villages, allowing Jordan to become among one of the leading countries in the Arab world in terms of literacy. King Hussein also sought throughout his reign to promote peace in the Middle East. After the 1967 war with Israel, he was instrumental in drafting UN Security Council Resolution 242, which calls on Israel to withdraw from all occupied Arab lands in exchange for peace. In 1991, King Hussein played a pivotal role in convening the Madrid Peace Conference, providing an umbrella for Palestinians to negotiate their future as part of a joint Jordanian-Palestinian delegation. The 1994 peace treaty between Jordan and Israel was a major step towards a just, comprehensive and lasting peace in the Middle East. In honor of the builder of modern Jordan, His Majesty King Abdullah visited the tomb of the late King Hussein. The king, along with royal family members, recited verses from the Holy Quran and laid a wreath on the tomb. His Majesty also received cables from senior officers who paid tribute to the late king, noting that he dedicated his life to his people and building his country. King Hussein was the longest serving of state in the world at the time of his death on February 7, 1999. For the news at 10, this is Asiya Hattab reporting.
His Majesty the King welcomed Kirill I, the Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, and an accompanying delegation who are on a tour of the region. The King and the Patriarch stressed enhancing the values of tolerance and interfaith dialogue to spread the message of peace and love across the globe. His Majesty noted that the 2004 Amman message seeks to promote tolerance, moderation and dialogue, values that upholds. The King said the opening of a Russian pilgrim's house at the Jordan Valley baptism site of Jesus Christ would further boost relations between the two countries, mainly in tourism. King Abdullah also warned that unilateral Israeli actions in occupied Jerusalem would threaten Islamic and Christian holy sites. He said the Russian Church could help to stop the Judaization of the holy city. Patriarch Kirill hailed the King's effort to extend bridges among peoples and adherents of various religions. Fresh riots broke out across the kingdom today. The government liberalized the prices of oil derivatives. Police reported that angry protesters blocked roads, burned tires and vandalized property. Protesters took to the streets last night after Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour went on television to announce the fuel price hikes. There have been calls for the government to cancel the decision to lift the oil subsidies. Hala Dababne has more on the riots.
Last night's decision to raise fuel prices touched off riots across the kingdom. Security forces dispersed protesters gathered at Amman's Interior Ministry Circle to protest the decision to lift fuel subsidies. Although hundreds closed the circle and chanted slogans, which authorities said were in breach of Jordanian laws and norms, they were still afforded police protection. Elsewhere, acts of riot and vandalism took place in various towns, leading to clashes with security officers. 10 officers were injured by gunshots, some of them seriously, and 4 citizens were also hurt. In the north, scores of rioters, some armed, tried to storm a police station near Irbid, leading to confrontations in which 7 officers were injured, some seriously. A police statement said rioters caused damage to public and private property as the demonstrations were not as peaceful as most of those staged in various parts of the country to protest the government measures. It said the Nuaima main intersection on the Amman-Irbid highway was also blocked by protesters, while the city of Irbid itself witnessed a protest, as was the case in other major cities. In Balqa Governorate, 3 gendarmerie officers were injured by gunshots and 5 vehicles were set alight. More violent protests also broke out in Madaba and Zarqa governorates, with youths blocking roads, damaging public and private property, and shooting at policemen and gendarmerie. But there were no reports of injuries. Southern governorates also witnessed demonstrations which turned into acts of violence, vandalism, and looting. Rioters burnt wires, threw stones to block roads, and attacked policemen and the gendarmerie. The Public Security Department said normal life returned to various parts of the kingdom, and the authorities are in the process of assessing damage to public and private property. Hala Dababne reporting for the News at 10.
The Ministry of Industry and Trade decided to reduce the price of flour by 20 dinars a ton after floating the prices of oil derivatives. It said the measure was to offset the rising cost on bakeries after the fuel price hike. Meanwhile, the Land Transport Regulatory Commission said it had raised public transport fares, including taxis, by about 10% with immediate effect. The Commission said it had set the new fares and also amended truck transport fares. Simultaneously, the government announced a series of fiscal disciplinary measures to cut spending, ease the pressure on a ballooning deficit, and address a bloated public system. The austerity package also includes reducing the ministerial team to 20, merging some ministries and public departments and entities, and imposing new curbs on the travel of officials, in addition to strict controls on the use of public vehicles. It also announced other rationing and tighter recruitment and employment measures to ease burdens on the Treasury. Meanwhile, the Insurance Commission denied reports that it will raise mandatory vehicle insurance premiums by 50% starting next year. Jordan, along with the Islamic world, celebrates the Hijra year. Deputizing for His Majesty the King, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Al-Hussein led a ceremony organized by the Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs on the evening of the holy occasion. In remarks, Minister of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs Abdul Salam Abadi stressed the lessons drawn from as a turning point in a call for faith and the Muslim nation's history. Other themes stressed during the ceremony were national solidarity and unity, with speakers calling for rallying behind the kingdom's leadership at this moment of challenges as a result of the turmoil in the region. The landmark Hijra paved the way for the establishment of the early Islamic State. On the new Hijra year, His Majesty the King received cables of congratulations from leaders of Arab and Muslim countries, senior officials, public figures, and heads of security departments. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour reiterated that upcoming parliamentary elections will be fair and transparent. He was briefing European Union envoys on the kingdom's economic hardships and a deficit-stricken state budget. Mansour said a government decision to raise oil prices will not affect about 70% of Jordanian society. In a meeting attended by Foreign Minister Nasser Joudeh, they also discussed Jordanian EU ties and other issues of common interest. On Syria, Joudeh said Jordan concurs with the Arab view that a political solution has to be found to end the suffering of Syrian people and stop the bloodshed in a country. The European envoys hailed Jordan for hosting Syrian refugees and said they are keen on Jordan's stability in view of the turmoil in the region. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour discussed with President of the Jordanian Contractors Association, Ahmed Tarawneh, and members challenges posed to the sector. Tarawneh said debts to the government were the biggest challenge, calling for incorporating capital projects in the state budget. The Prime Minister highlighted the importance of the construction sector as a partner in the economic development process and pledged support of the sector to enable it to create more jobs for Jordanians. Jordan will set up a third camp for single Syrian refugees. Anmar Hamoud, the government spokesperson for Syrian refugee affairs, said the government has allocated a 100 dunum plot of land near the University of Science and Technology in the northern governorate of Ramtha to receive 18,000 refugees. Hamoud said Saudi Arabia will provide 1,800 tents for the new camp. He also said a total of 413 Syrians entered the kingdom on night. In the meantime, the Jordan Hashemite Charity Organization, the body overseeing aid to Syrian refugees in the kingdom, said it received assistance from China. China will also provide 240 caravans to protect the refugees from the cold winter. Syria's new opposition coalition will set up its headquarters in Cairo as it lobbies foreign powers for recognition as the war-torn country's legitimate government. The newly elected opposition header, Muaz al-Khatib, has been invited to Paris after France said it would recognize the coalition as the sole representative of the Syrian people. As fighting continued unabated across Syria, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said 18 government troops were killed in clashes near the Turkish border. Luay Balkar has an update.
The ongoing conflict in Syria continues to take a heavy toll on civilians. Many refugees have fled the country with their belongings through a hole in a flimsy barbed wire fence. Several people, mostly women and children, rushed across the border seeking shelter in neighboring towns. Many more Syrians have recently been displaced within neighboring countries and bracing for a long conflict. There are 120,000 Syrian refugees sheltering in camps in southeastern Turkey, a region where Ankara is also fighting an emboldened Kurdish insurgency. Turkey sent fighter jets to its border in response to a renewed Syrian air assault on the rebel-held frontier town of Ras Al Ain. For the fourth day in a row, the sound of mortars, bombs and gunfire echoed through the border. A Syrian jet struck twice, knocking buildings on the Turkish side and sending huge plumes of smoke over the Syrian town. Rebels overran Ras Al Ain last week during an advance into Syria's mixed Arab and Kurdish northeast that has triggered the biggest refugee movements of the conflict. Turkey assured its citizens living on the Syrian border that they are safe, but it warned Damascus that the Turkish military would retaliate.
Our citizens, residents living in that shouldn't be concerned. The Turkish armed forces are on duty day and night, and our troops deployed in the area are granted authorization to retaliate immediately if deemed necessary.
Elsewhere in the north, Syrian forces in the city of Aleppo raided rebel hideouts and demolished cars and weapons belonging to the opposition. The rebels have recently been in control of rural parts of the Syria's largest city, cutting off from Damascus. In a further escalation, Syrian warplanes bombed rebel enclaves inside Damascus in a stepped-up aerial bombardment of districts close out of the capital. Gunfire was also heard from the buffer zone between Syria and Israel. The rebels have been battling government troops in towns inside and close to the buffer zone. In the past days, Israel opened fire across the border after stray mortar shells flew into the occupied land. There have been similar worries in the neighboring countries about incidents on their own borders with Syria, where Syrian government troops have been fighting rebels for 20 months. Luay Balkar for the news at 10.
Israel killed the military commander of the Palestinian Hamas in a missile strike on a Gaza Strip, 5 other Palestinians also died in air raids across the enclave, drawing warnings of retaliation from Palestinian factions. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called on Israel and Hamas to prevent an escalation and ensure civilians will be protected. Shanqiti reports on the latest hostilities.
Tension on the Gaza-Israel border is further heightened, with Israel unleashing its air power. Israel killed 6 Palestinians and the military commander of Hamas in more than 20 airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, bringing the two sides to the brink of a possible new war. Hamas said Ahmad al-Jabari, who ran the organization's armed wing, the Izz-e-Din al-Qassam brigades, died along with a passenger after their car was targeted by a missile. Israel's Shin Bet Secret Service confirmed it had carried out the attack, saying it killed Jabari because of what it called his decade-long terrorist activity. The targets of the airstrikes were suspected underground caches of long-range Hamas rockets. The Israel military said its stepped-up aerial assaults could draw cross-border Palestinian rocket attacks and stretch into days of fighting, including a ground offensive if required. Immediate calls for revenge were broadcast over Hamas radio, and some groups also warned of retaliation. Hamas's armed military wing said Israel has opened the gates of hell. The attacks came despite signs that Egypt had managed to broker a truce between Israel and Palestinians after a 5-day surge of violence which saw more than 100 missiles fired out of Gaza and repeated Israeli strikes on the enclave. Lake Shanqiti for the news at 10.
A series of car bombs killed at least 14 people across Iraq. The upsurge in violence came on the eve of Muslim festival to mark the start of the Islamic New Year. The deadliest explosion took place in the disputed and ethnic city of Kirkuk, north of Baghdad, where 4 bombs planted in parked cars went off simultaneously, killing 9 people and wounding 30. In the southern city of Hilla, 4 people were killed in a car bomb. Another car bomb targeting an Interior Ministry official in central Baghdad killed 1 passerby and wounded 9 others, including 3 policemen. To Australia, a rare full solar eclipse plunged North Queensland into darkness for 2 minutes, delighting thousands of people who gathered on the state's beaches. While North Queensland was treated to a full eclipse, a eclipse was visible in other parts of Australia, New Zealand, Chile, and Antarctica. Authorities warned spectators to wear safety goggles, noting the sun remains incredibly powerful even when hidden behind the moon.
People gather at a beach in northern Queensland, ready to witness a rare sight. The chance of catching a full solar eclipse drew large crowds to the state on Wednesday. Many were armed with safety goggles as the moon began its journey across the sun. An extra 60,000 people were expected to head to the state and watch the event. And with clear conditions here at Palm Cove, the spectacle delighted crowds. North Queensland was plunged into darkness for 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've never seen anything like this before.
Wow, we got the perfect clearing for it. It was absolutely amazing.
The event was expected to generate a $78 million tourism boost for the region. A partial eclipse was also visible in other parts of Australia.
Jordan lost to Iraq 1-0 in the 5th round of the Asian 2014 World Cup qualifiers. The loss sent Jordan into the bottom of Group B with 4 points. Iraq scored the only goal in the 89th minute of the match in the Qatari capital, Doha. And France is expecting a beautiful battle with Italy. National team coach Cesare Prandelli gave Italian soccer fans a glimpse into the future when he named a young team to face France in an international friendly in Parma. Beaten in June in their 2012 final, Italy have gone on to record World Cup qualifying wins over Malta, Armenia and Denmark, but they have impressed only in patches. France will hope to continue the momentum after a 1-1 draw with world and European champion Spain in a World Cup qualifier last month. Finally, a quick look at the weather forecast. A relatively cold night with light winds. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperatures is expected with a pleasant day in most parts of the kingdom and 18 Celsius degrees in Amman. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a chilly night and moderate day tomorrow with light winds picking up at times and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And for a quick recap of the main headlines. Jordanians remember His Majesty the late King Hussein. Riots break out in various cities over the government's decision to raise fuel prices. And at least 6 Palestinians, including a Hamas commander, are killed in stepped-up Israeli raids on the Gaza Strip. That's all the news for tonight. I'm Mal Majali for the latest. Join us tomorrow, same time. Have a good night.